Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Waxman family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Waxman family JCC is an incubator for new expressions of Jewish identity. It creates innovative Jewish learning, celebrations, and arts programs that inspire personal connections to people and ideas from across the Jewish world. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 241, At the Well. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebinson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And as we continue the series looking at organizations created by women for women, as we've explored in other cases, organizations created by and for people who have been excluded from some of the central operations of the Jewish establishment, so to speak, over the course of Jewish history. Of course, we need to take note of and express grief for the loss of one of the giants of American Jewish women, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who passed away about a week ago. We record these episodes in advance, and so our conversation today isn't about Justice Ginsburg. I'm sure that we will talk about her and her legacy with some of our guests in future series. But of course, Justice Ginsburg represents a lot of what we talk about on this show in terms of a person who brings the values that they absorbed, and she's talked about having absorbed it from various Jewish experiences that she had in various Jewish contexts in which she grew up. And she brought those things to bear on her work as a justice of the country, not directly, of course, that would be inappropriate, but what an incredible example of a person whose values and whose being was informed in the most positive ways by Jewish experiences and Jewish content and Jewish values, and who has helped us infuse some of her work from the general society back into Judaism, and ultimately, hopefully, creating a virtuous cycle in which Judaism is made better and the world is made better because of this dialogue between Judaism and other pursuits. We grieve her loss. Another comment before we move on to the interview. Yom Kippur is coming up in a few days. If you are looking forward to attending Zoom services with your synagogue, that is totally fine, of course. But if you're not, or if your Zoom services at your synagogue are only in the morning and you're looking for something meaningful to do in the afternoon, we would suggest that you check out the resources section on the Judaism Unbound website and look for High Holidays Unbound, which will give you a set of resources that you can do instead of or in addition to going to services, including a 3-hour playlist of popular music that is designed to try to track some of the themes of the High Holiday services. You can also head to the Jewish Live website, www.jewishlive.org, and check out a whole host of things, some of which are directly related to the High Holidays, such as a show called Pray with Transgressors, which explores the High Holiday liturgy through a more secular lens, or the Akedah Project, which is a collection of short talks about the Binding of Isaac story, and maybe more directly related to Rosh Hashanah, but certainly a valuable activity to do on Yom Kippur, and a whole host of other programs that you might just find you want to spend the day doing something Jewish, and that would be something meaningfully Jewish to do. So we recommend any of those things or lots of other opportunities that are out there online, and we look forward to hearing what you did for Yom Kippur. I should mention that many synagogues have the tradition, which frankly I don't love that much, of doing a Yom Kippur appeal or a Kol Nidre appeal. There's a small way that we'd love to do that too. Not going to spend too much time on it, but we absolutely need your support in order to continue this work. And if the Spirit moves you to make financial contributions at this time of the High Holidays, then we would humbly ask if you would be willing to make a small or a large donation at www.judaismunbound.com/donate, where you can choose to give any amount or even to give a recurring monthly donation, which a lot of people are wanting to do these days. And we love that, of course, because it helps us have a predictable revenue stream. So thank you so much for continuing to support Judaism Unbound. And now let's move on to our conversation for today. Today, we talk to the founder of an organization called At the Well. It's an organization devoted to connecting women around the world through transformative practices inspired by ancient Jewish wisdom. Its work centers around the ancient idea, that the first day of the new moon, Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the Hebrew month, is a particularly important time for women. And as we'll talk about in this conversation, At the Well has really dug into that idea, has created what they call well circles, which are groups of women that come together each month for a combination of spirituality, conversation. We're going to talk about all that today. And also, in order to facilitate that, or as just another offering, they distribute something called the Moon Manual, which is a monthly collection of written materials, all rooted in the stories from ancient Jewish texts. As they write on their website, the Moon Manuals are filled with inspiring tales, creative activities, poems, meditations, recipes, and articles written by female leaders from around the world. Our guest today is the founder of At the Well, Sarah Waxman. Sarah Waxman has a background in sociology and holistic medicine, and in addition to that, she is a national champion athlete, having led as the goalkeeper championship teams both in high school and college in the sport of lacrosse. She is a member of the Greater Washington Jewish Sports Hall of Fame. Sarah Waxman is also an instructor of yoga and mindfulness. At the Well is a really exciting organization these days, and we're so excited to have Sarah Waxman here on Judaism Unbound. So Sarah Waxman, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Can we get started by just giving us a deep understanding of what At the Well does, what it's all about, in a kind of functional way? Like when I go there, what happens?
Well, when you go there, we hope that you feel really connected and like you found this gold mine that you thought that you sort of were looking for, and then poof, we really exist. It's also a long time coming that there's an organization that's here to support and lift up the ritual of Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh means new moon. We can get into the geeky text part of it later in the podcast, but essentially it's a women's holiday. It's a time to come together and storytell and learn and lift each other up and pass the really important information about ourselves, about our bodies, and about Judaism together. And so when you come to At the Well, you will see that we're a network of women around the world that are using transformative practices that are rooted in Jewish wisdom. And the main thing that we do is to create what we call well circles. Well circles are our version of Rosh Chodesh circles. There's a lot of resources and coaching and training to teach you to create a small pod of people who will meet every month on the new moon and use the Hebrew calendar as a theme for personal reflection and togetherness.
So can you paint that picture in even more granular detail? Like, what happens? How many people get together? And I guess we should also be talking about pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. But I mean, let's start with pre-COVID. What would it have looked like to see a well circle happening? How many people are there? What are they doing?
Yeah, what it looks like is that we're probably in someone's living room. And that person has made it really special and warm because tonight's the night that they get to host the well circle in their house. We take a rotating leadership model. So every month, somebody else hosts in their home and somebody else facilitates, always two people lifting up the group together. Obviously, this was the pre-COVID time, so we were in each other's homes and it felt safe. And it was a really special way to be a host and to invite people into your space, into your temple, and to make it beautiful. And you would probably see a lot of candles in the circle and people sitting close and very engaged with each other. In COVID time, it's the exact same thing, except we're faces and squares on boxes on Zoom rooms, or we're socially distanced in our backyards with masks and 6 feet apart. But the ritual remains the same, and how we practice it remains the same, in that we're using the theme of each Hebrew calendar month to have a meaningful discussion and to provide a basis for connection. It just depends on where that's actually happening, in the living room, in the Zoom room, in the park or the backyard. That's what's flexible during these uncertain times.
Why is it so important to have this project, both on the general, like having an organization that loves and honors Rosh Chodesh, and having an organization that loves and honors specifically women's spirituality around Rosh Chodesh? Like, what made you create this project, and why is it so important for it to keep on rolling?
Well, first of all, I called it a project when I started because it was a passion project of mine. I realized that there were only 3 books or 4 books in English ever written about Rosh Chodesh. And the last one was written before I was born. And so if I wanted to create a Rosh Chodesh circle with my friends, which I desperately was trying to do, it felt like we had no resources to support us, no organization to support us, no books to pull from. And I just kept thinking, we're the people of the book, but we have no books about this women's holiday. And that's because women have always owned oral Torah, and this was always an oral Torah tradition. Women never really wrote things down as part of our Jewish wisdom until recently. And so we're missing so much information, accumulated wisdom that has disappeared because of moving around, because of persecution, and because we've never specifically sought out the wisdom of women. But there's an unbelievable amount of missing information that certainly was part of my inheritance as someone who's a cis woman and Jewish and named Sarah that I'm missing. And so I felt into that sadness and pain and void. And I really felt into how the power of what happens when you bring women together with this intentionality, the type of transformation that can happen. And so I said, man, I can't believe there's nothing here. And for 2 years, I was sort of angry about it. And then one day I woke up and I was like, oh my gosh, if Queen Esther was the right woman at the right time to do something big, not because she had to, but potentially because she was in the moment to do it, then perhaps I can be like Queen Esther. I'm the right person at the right time. I'm the one who's having sleepless nights about this idea. And I need to step up to something that I perhaps was born for. And this is the moment. And so it was just a newsletter. It started as a newsletter that I sent every week before each Rosh Chodesh on themes of the next month. And it became what is known as our moon manuals on our website. It's free, open sourced content that are activities and poems and discussion questions and journal questions that really center around the month as a guide for personal growth. Now we're 5 years later, almost to the day, and it has turned into an organization. I wouldn't say it's just a project anymore. It's its own 501c3 organization. But it takes this project mentality because we want to pull people into the ritual to inspire them to create their own words in between each lines on the page, that they breathe it into life and that we're building it together. And I love that word because it feels like it's not finished, it's in progress.
Can you talk a little bit about Rosh Chodesh as a women's holiday, the first day of the month? I guess there's a natural way of understanding, and I'd love for you to talk about this, that a monthly holiday as a women's holiday, right, has to do in part with the menstrual cycle. But can you talk about it also historically? Like, when did it become? Was it always a women's holiday? Was it always understood as a women's holiday? Do we know? Was it initially a women's holiday and then the men kind of took it over and now it's being reclaimed? You know, like, what do you know about the history of Rosh Chodesh? And of the things that we don't know, what is sort of informed speculation, or what is spiritual knowledge that animates this, even if we might not have the formal historical knowledge?
Rosh Chodesh is the very first thing that God commands the Israelites to do upon leaving slavery in Egypt. Now you're free. Mark the new moon of Nisan and all the moons thereafter. And the rabbis ask why. And they say, because the difference between being a slave and a free person is our own ownership of time. When we are in charge of our own time, and as Jewish people, we will mark the months by the moon, then we know when we want to work and when we want to rest and when we want to be with family and when we want to do whatever it is that we do. When we were slaves, we didn't get to make that choice. And so it's unbelievably important for Jewish people to be in relationship with time because it's our way of knowing that we're free. So obviously Rosh Chodesh is for all people of all bodies, of all genders, of all ages. If you identify with being Jewish, then Rosh Chodesh is your first commandment. Thanks to rabbis like Pirkei Eliezer and Rashi, it got elevated to being a women's holiday. And they probably were just commenting on something that was happening naturally. And they said, how could it be that we built the tabernacle, the Mishkan, and decked it out with all of our beauty if we had already given all of our jewelry to build the golden calf when Moses was up receiving the 10 Commandments? And the rabbis pondered this, and they came up, the sort of summation of their thoughts were that the golden calf was on Rosh Chodesh, the women were separate, the women refused to give their jewelry to Aaron. And so therefore, they're the keepers of the faith, and they get Rosh Chodesh as an extra elevated women's holiday. And so therefore, women have always gotten Rosh Chodesh as an extra day of coming together and rest. The thing about that is that that's where the written word of how to celebrate Rosh Chodesh ended. And so Rosh Chodesh was sort of put in place as one of the most lawless, rituals in all of Judaism. We were told to mark time, and then we were told that it was an elevated time for people identified as women, but there was no clear instructions about what to do. That means that there's so much opportunity to create something that works for a very diverse group of people, and anybody that's really looking for this type of mind, body, soul, conversation, connection. I should add also that there's been Midrash since this time. I mean, we have Anita Diamond's Red Tent, which I think is like a book that's translated into more languages than almost any book. And it depicts the story of the matriarchs in the Red Tent, which was this monthly hut that, females would go to and transfer information and sometimes gossip and slander. But, I'm Sarah. I'm named for a difficult relationship with another woman named Hagar, which we read on Rosh Hashanah. But that's not what my biggest dream of the Red Tent is. The biggest dream is that actually it's a place to come together and lift each other up. And then also in the 60s and 70s, sort of traditional Orthodox women were looking for a place to be feminist and to be supporting women's empowerment without pulling away from tradition. And they found these lines of text from Rashi, and they set out to create some containers and some instructions for what Rosh Chodesh should look like. And those are the 3 or 4 books that have been written. And then there was about 20, 30 years of no codifying of the practice. In my mainstream conservative Jewish upbringing, I never learned about it for 1 second in all of my Jewish education. It wasn't something that my mom or my grandmothers did. So when I found Rosh Chodesh during a real search for myself to see whether or not there was spirituality in Judaism and there was wellness in Judaism, and I found Rosh Chodesh, I was transformed immediately because it's so unlike all the other things, and it was so exactly what I was looking for in terms of making it relational, making it my own, and giving me freedom to think about my personal growth with others. Women's circles are trending in every aspect of the secular world. And so I likely would be part of one because it's needed and natural. But with Rosh Chodesh, I can also have it be something that's Jewish, where I'm actually able to use my ancestors' wisdom, deep, beautiful Jewish wisdom on the Hebrew calendar, to make me feel good and make me feel connected, and use as a place to wrestle important things about what it means to be alive and what it means to be spiritual with other people. So it's sort of the best of both worlds, and I think that's what really inspired me to go forward. I see Rosh Chodesh as a wellness practice.
I want to talk about, why is X Rosh Chodesh different from all other Rosh Chodeshes? Like a little bit about each, like how the year sort of flows and how the different months have these different valences. I think it's like one of my favorite things about Judaism. People say sort of in the abstract, like Judaism is so into time, and people will quote Abraham Joshua Heschel's The Sabbath. And I think often when people talk about time and how Judaism does lots of time things, they're thinking about Shabbat and how there's this weekly moment. I think that the way we assign meaning to each of the 12ths of the year, on one level, I think it's intuitive, but it's like not everybody has done that. Like in our secular world, sure, like when September rolls around, I guess in my general head, I think, okay, Labor Day and like fall is ending, right? But we haven't like assigned a joy month in the way that Judaism has thought about Adar in the spring as kind of a joy month. We haven't assigned a major sadness month in the way that Judaism has kind of assigned Av in the summer as a major sadness month. And we could go right down the list. We're going to end up giving short shrift to some of the months, but like I'm curious, can you like talk us through like what even some of the traditional orientations to different months of the year are, and like how that would manifest in like how a given circle might sort of experience those months differently. Because what I love about this is like it's a rhythmic ritual where you come together over and over again, which we need, but it's almost by definition, it has to change. Like it can't be the same every time in the way that lots of Shabbat services are roughly the same every time. Like it has to be different to fit whatever the month is.
Yeah, the Hebrew calendar is brilliant. Just thing to add, I don't understand why I would ever have the new year in the dead of winter. There's no ancient teaching or any sort of doctor that would ever say, oh, that's the great time to consider making New Year's intentions is, the end of December, January in the secular calendar that we have. The Hebrew calendar makes way more sense when we're thinking about feeling into our emotions, like you said, having a joy month or having an anger month. And if you think about the cycle in whole, it really is a cycle. So Rosh Hashanah happens, then we go into the winter and we have Kislev and we have Tevet, and the darkest time of the year, we're commanded to find light. And we acknowledge that it's a really hard time. Tevet is a really hard month where a lot of anger usually comes up. Then we come out of the winter time and we start by celebrating the birthday of the trees, right? Tu B'Shvat. And it starts to be like a feeling of hope and planting and good. And it's like this tender, loving care to come out of the depths of the winter. And then we come into Adar, which you said is about joy and happiness. And it's so good that when the rabbis were thinking about which month we needed extra for the leap year, they were like, oh, we should obviously give them 2 joyous months because that's what Judaism is about at its core. And what's interesting is actually the Hebrew calendar starts with Nisan, which is the month after Adar. So I probably should have started explaining this with Nisan, but since I'm on a roll here,
I was actually going to ask you about that.
I don't think there's a should. I think, we get lots of different kinds of New Year's. And so you started
we have
with
4
Tishrei this time.
I started with that because it's the most common New Year. If someone says, when's the New Year? You think Rosh Hashanah. So I wanted, to assure you that what you did learn in Hebrew school and at synagogue was correct. But actually, when we start marking time, Nisan and Passover is technically the first month in terms of counting.
Good, because we usually tell people what they learned in Hebrew school is wrong. So this is very reassuring for
I'm trying to meet people.
Wrong, but that's another story.
Everything is always, you can always twist an answer in Judaism. It's beautiful. It's just a framework. But Adar actually is a month of chaos, which is beautiful to think about, that we end the calendar year with flipping things on its head, getting drunk to reveal ourselves and find the holiest day of the year, which is Purim. And then we start with Nisan as the beginning of marking our freedom with Passover. And then we go into the Omer, which is the counting of time between Passover and Shavuot. And it's about stepping closer towards our freedom. And that makes sense with spring because you want to run around and play. And all of a sudden, like my dad and I are in the backyard doing cartwheels. Like, where were the cartwheels 4 months ago in the winter, And then we're at Shavuot, and Shavuot is right there in Sivan, and Sivan and Shavuot are the time that we are at our peak of freedom, and we are available to receive should we be paying attention and tapped into the Hebrew calendar. And in secular time, it's like right as school is ending. So you're just like, bring it on, summer. And then in the Hebrew calendar, unlike the secular calendar, when we think summer, we think barbecues and playing. The Hebrew calendar says that in the lightest time of the year, we actually have some darkness. And that's reflected in society. I mean, crime rates historically go up in the summer. When people are feeling heated in their bodies, sometimes really challenging things happen. And the Hebrew calendar is saying that to us. It starts with the breach of the walls of Jerusalem in Tammuz, and then we go through the saddest time of the year from middle end of Tammuz all the way through Tisha B'Av. That really asks us to feel sadness. And for anybody who's read Lamentations, it's very hard to read that text, which is what we read on Tisha B'Av, without just being like unbelievably sad. And then we immediately are caught by the full moon of Av, which is Tu B'Av, which was placed there on purpose to catch those challenging feelings, to lift us back up and make us feel love, which is what we need in order to get back into Elul, the month before Rosh Hashanah, where we feel loved and held in order to acknowledge that we were humans and we missed the mark. And then we go into Rosh Hashanah, where we have the spiritual high of 21 out of 29 days of the month of Tishrei as elevated times to connect with God. And then we go into Sukkot and we wander and we create the cycle again. During the summertime, when it's the light outside, it can be dark inside. When it's the wintertime, when it's dark outside, there's about light in the inside. In the fall, it's about going inward towards yourselves and making sure that you feel connected to the divine with love. And the springtime is all about cultivating your sense of unbelievable freedom. And so it's a cycle. And to me, it makes a whole lot more sense in terms of my own growth and my own moral compass for who I want to be than anything that to do in the secular calendar, which it feels kind of erratic and not necessarily thought through.
On that last point, I'm just curious if you think about like the secular calendar, so to speak, as not thought through and the Hebrew calendar is, or would you say that like we could place a certain set of those valences right on the secular calendar if somebody were so inclined, right? I mean, like somebody could find, like, I guess my question is, does the Hebrew calendar inherently have these meanings, or was this, the genius of, let's say, the early rabbis or somebody else who kind of projected these meanings onto the calendar in that beautiful way that you just described?
I mean, I really do think that's the brilliance of the rabbis to be connected to the land and be connected to cycles and to relate that to our emotions and really reflect on what's happening for humans. And also, for me, I use obviously the secular Roman calendar as a way for work. I think it was designed for that always. I can't just say to you, okay, I'll meet you on the 23rd of Av for this podcast recording. And so I think of the Roman time as my work calendar. And then I think of the Hebrew calendar as my spiritual calendar and the one that I'm checking in daily to understand what type of emotional work it is my job as a Jewish person to be doing now. How does it relate to my freedom? How does it relate to what I'm supposed to be focusing on? For the people who've gone to therapy before, like myself, like the therapist is like, what do you want to work on? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, where do I even start? And so the Hebrew calendar is there to guide, saying this is the month to really lean into your joy. This is the month to break it down. This is the month to feel sad. This is the month to go towards a broken string in your family ties and retie that knot to each other. This is the month to eat matzah. And that guidepost is really helpful to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I share Dan's impulse and constantly am looking for ways that we can sort of sanctify the secular calendar in addition to the Jewish calendar. But I also I'm pulled in multiple directions because I do think there's a genius at play here, but I also in the Jewish calendar, but I want to name ways in which we've sort of done this secularly. We just haven't noticed and we haven't talked about it. And I'm drawing on one of our teachers on the podcast, Casper ter Kuile, who one of his core teachings is like, you do holy stuff in your life. You're just like not calling it holy. You're not noticing it. So like I recently had a conversation because I'm always in the universe of like sports and Judaism stuff. And I was talking with my spouse actually, and then my dad and a few others about like, what are the New Year's in the sports calendar? For people that are like deep in the sports calendar, like when do we experience New Year's? And there were a few like shared answers and multiple of them aligned with where we approximately have Jewish New Year's, the different New Year's that we have. The opening day of baseball is in the spring, usually around Passover. When the new football season starts in the fall is usually right around Rosh Hashanah. Everybody who's checking their phones in services, sneaking off to the bathroom to see what's going on, can verify that. And then if we broaden beyond just sports, the school year starts around that general time. College students who are stressed because the first day of class is Rosh Hashanah can tell you all about that one. And the fiscal year even. I always joke when the fiscal year rolls around, it's the first day of the 7th month of the secular calendar. Like the July 1st is often the change of the fiscal year. Obviously there's like different fiscal years too. But like I joked like, that's the one moment from the Bible that we've actually sanctified as a secular society. The first day of the 7th month, we turn the page, we start a new year. I think we talk about Judaism as having like multiple New Years as being a deeply distinctive thing. But I think the point is we all need multiple New Years. And that's part of what Rosh Chodesh does, right? Like it's a new month, right? So it's not necessarily a new year always. Although even like the first of Elul is called the New Year for animals and text. Like there are ways that we call it New Year's. But I guess my question is like, to what extent is this ritual valuable just because like we need to constantly be renewing? Like we need to constantly be beginning and turning the page. And like it's not enough to just have a Rosh Hashanah once a year where we look inward. Like we actually need this kind of constantly.
I think the point that you're saying that I share with you is that humans need structure, humans need rhythm, humans need time to come together and talk about the things that are important to them in their life. And ritualizing them makes it holy and elevates it from just being a mundane thing. As an athlete myself, like there's nothing more stressful than making it to the national championship and then having that national championship be on a time that I can't go because I'm Jewish and I have to make this really hard decision for myself. There's nothing more stressful than starting school and having Rosh Hashanah at the same time. So maybe I'm having, I hold the Hebrew calendar up more importantly because it has to do with spiritual work, and the regular calendar feels more like work, and I'm in conflict as a Jew. But it does feel pretty overwhelming sometimes. But I think that you're naming, school starting in the fall is a very natural thing because it's a new time. But yeah, Rosh Chodesh is definitely an opportunity for each month to say, okay, Av is now done. That was a roller coaster. Sometimes I'm low and sometimes I'm high, and that was really intense and I'm exhausted. And now I'm going to close this out. I'm going to get together with my Well Circle, my Rosh Chodesh group, and I'm going to pivot towards finding a beloved in God, Ani Ladodi Li, which is the acrostic for the Hebrew month of Elul, which is the month before Rosh Hashanah. The same is true. Like when Kislev ends and Tevet comes, it's saying, okay, I've just cultivated this joy and light in my life. And now it's time for me to do a little bit of the hard work because, we know that the beginning of winter, we feel hopeful. We're going to do this. We got this. Like I got my new winter coat. It's going to be okay. And then 2 months, 3 months into the dead of the winter and it's cold. It's like, wow, I've been inside with the family too much and we're getting on each other's nerves. And the Hebrew calendar is right there to say, I got you. Notice the anger that might come up. Let's acknowledge it. Let's tackle it together.
Could you give a little bit of an example for, any given month? Like when people get together in a Well Circle, what do they do? Do they pray? Do they have a curriculum where they're studying something? How does that spiritual work actually happen? And what do you imagine is the ideal, I suppose the ideal right now? Like describe a little bit the experience of a person who travels through at the well over the course of a year, but also, where are you trying to go? Where how might at the well deepen this over the course of time? What's your, do you see at the well as what it's doing basically, but more and better, and that's part of a larger Jewish landscape? Or is there something in particular that you're really driving at the well towards? Those are two separate questions. So let's start with, what actually happens there.
I mean, Rosh Chodesh is the quintessential DIY Jewish ritual because, again, there's no laws or instructions about how to celebrate it, which means that it's truly open for your own interpretation. What At the Well does is provides a lot of teaching, a lot of content, a lot of different activities that are based on that teaching. So we encourage a rotating leadership model, which means that every month there's a new teacher for your group. Every month, a different person is hosting in their home when that's allowed. It is truly up to the facilitator for each month to look at the theme, saying, okay, what is the teaching of the month of Cheshvan? And then go to our resources and you'll see a meditation, a journal thing, an art project, a recipe. There's a lot of different modalities that they could take with this teaching. I participated in a Well Circle for 3 years. We were all like yoga teachers or massage therapists or something. And so our Well Circle all the time was very embodied. We did a lot of movement. We did a lot of dance. We used the themes of the month and processed that spiritual work through our bodies. Yesterday, I talked to a Well Circle that loved text. They came together and they decided that we're going to really base our teachings around text. And so they use the Torah portions that are associated with each month and they learn something from there. Another circle might decide they only want to learn the women in the biblical characters that show up in that month, and they base it on that. Every group gets to decide for themselves. Every facilitator takes on the ownership of what their teaching voice looks like. What happens with a group over time is that you can go back to the Cheshvan before and be like, wow, first of all, the world was completely different. And also last time I can say that Rebecca led us through this unbelievable exercise, if we could remember that. This Cheshvan, I think we should do some journal reflecting and sharing with each other. Judaism, really loves to tell us how to do things, and that if you just recline to the left on the fourth glass of wine, then you're somehow going to be elevated to this one thing that you need to remember. And I found that oftentimes performing the ritual didn't actually bring me into my heart, didn't actually bring me into my emotional self, and that we got so caught up with just following the rules that we forgot about why the ritual or the law was put there. And so the well is the opposite of that. It's saying start with the feeling, start with the thing. Start with what it is that you want to achieve, and then think about the structure or the modality that will help us get there. Building off of that, we have a network of circles. And these circles are designed to have a rotating leadership model so that everyone has to have the job of leading, which inherently creates belonging because it's a group of people with a shared mission who are responsible for creating this together rather than just having one leader. And that then bleeds into the whole ethos of the network that we have. So if someone posts on our Facebook group, hey, I'm about to teach this month's circle, I want to lead something that is going to spark some creativity for my group. Any ideas? That person's going to get 10 ideas from the network itself. And then on top of that, we've built a structure so that we have 15 volunteer Well Circle coaches. So people can sign up to get a coaching, and we have people who want to volunteer their time to give back to the larger network by talking it out with people. The biggest thing that we see about why people don't do this is, number one, they didn't know that it existed, so we can work on that. And number two, fear. A fear that I don't know Jewish enough to lead it. A fear that women have never been taught to lift their voice, even in a time when we say that we're doing that as a society. Are we really still doing that? A fear of being perfect, just an enormous amount of fear. And what I've seen with our volunteer coaches and with myself of the thousands of conversations I've had over the years is that 1 hour-long conversation can really move someone very far. And we take the image of the well, not randomly. It's a play on wellness, obviously. It's a nod to one of the most incredible leaders that Jewish people have ever had in Miriam. And it's also a place that people have always gone for help and resources and information. And then they bring that information back to their tribe or to their town.
One thing that we have not unpacked yet, which I am excited, very, very excited to dive into, is that you're an athlete. And not only that, you're a very, very successful athlete. You were the National Division I Goalkeeper of the Year in lacrosse. That's a pretty amazing thing. And I want to talk with you about that, because it's cool. Listeners, you're hearing from somebody who is in their college's Hall of Fame, who's in, a Jewish Hall of Fame for sports, but also because, I think that there is something here in how you've constructed. I mean, I'm being presumptuous, but like there feels to me like something where a person who has a background as a part of a team sport would be uniquely well suited to start something in the way you have, which is, I was on your website for At the Well, and I noticed something that struck me as very different from a lot of other Jewish communal projects, which is you strongly encourage people to have closed circles. On your site, it says that, 8 to 12 people is a great size for an At the Well circle, and it should really be like a contained group and not necessarily always open. And you say and you don't bar open. I mean, it then says if you want to have an open circle, you can. We just encourage a closed circle. And to me, that feels very much like sort of a team modality. It feels like somebody who spent time. Were you captain of your team?
Yeah.
Okay, so that doesn't surprise me. I mean, it as somebody who was deeply shaped in how I understand community generally. I think as much my cross country team in high school shaped my initial understandings of what it is to be part of a community, both like the obligations of community and the privileges and support of community that I receive. Like, I think there's ways in which that can really be learned in a deep way in athletics, especially in intercollegiate athletics, which I was not skilled enough to take part in. But like the people I knew who were on varsity or club sports, like the bond they had with their teammates was a level that was just deeper than even the people that I knew that were really involved with like with like a cappella groups on campus or even Hillel sometimes. Like there was just something that happened there. And I'm curious to ask, like, is there anything conscious that you're doing in your work to try and build groups of people that support each other, that do all of the things that like a socially healthy, good sports team would be? Obviously, there's also problems that happen in the sports world, to be sure, but like lots of them. But like, I'm curious because we haven't had somebody who is, you know, a Hall of Fame member. Talk us through that. Is that conscious? Do you think there might be something subconscious there? Am I making everything up? What's going on?
No, I think about this every day, constantly. I try to pull lessons that I've learned in my life to do the work. Beyond sports, I was also raised going to Quaker school my whole life. So I've always sat in circles. I've always found consensus. In terms of my sports, part of my ethos is to command the field and to lead the field, but stand in one place, to encourage 11 players to go out there and take risks and go for it and make it their own. And don't be afraid of messing up, because at the end of the day, I got you. But also train me to really be able to see things quickly and also see them in a bigger context than just each one shot. You make a save, and then you would be able to pass the ball 50 yards down the field to get a fast break. I truly am shaped by my experience as an athlete and playing at that level. There's also something about losing in the national championship that keeps a fire burning in you forever. Like if we had won that game, I wonder whether or not I'd take on starting in organizations and being an entrepreneur, or if because I lost that most important game that I worked every day for, that I have this thing that I'm still out there to get. I don't know. These are things that I think about. In terms of At the Well, the closed group allows belonging. When you have an open group of people, you have nobody that really owns, and you are going to end up having one person that needs to really be, quote unquote, the leader. And that means that you'll end up being a gathering or an event. You don't have the opportunity to pass it on to somebody. And when groups are open and they do pass it, it can be really beautiful, don't get me wrong, because you have the opportunity to invite people into this sacred space. Even if it's not for them, they got to witness it and feel it. But I think in terms of me and where I've felt like I've grown the most, felt the most comfortable sharing vulnerably, and also really gotten into the stuff, I need to build that relationship with people over time. And I need to know that other people in the group will invite me to their house and facilitate the conversation, and it's not just on my shoulders. I think rabbis, like goalies, can be very lonely people, because who's inviting them over for Shabbat? And when they invite them over for Shabbat, people get all nervous because the rabbi's coming and it wants to be perfect. Well Circle is the opposite. We all know that we're going to mess up, but that we're all here to watch each other's teachings. Again, as a goalie, you want to inspire your team to go out there and be great and hear the caboose. And that's how I see the work of At the Well. In ancient times, Rosh Chodesh would be marked by the Temple Mount would light a big bonfire. And then the next hill over would see that it was Rosh Chodesh, and they would light their bonfire. And then the next hill over would light their bonfire. And that's what At the Well is doing. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm part of one circle, and there's hundreds of other circles that are out there. Basically, what I've done is lit a very big fire, and that my job is to keep that fire going so that people can feel inspired by it and go out there. Just like an attacker might feel inspired to go out there and score that goal, so too can a Well Circle person go out there and feel inspired to create a really beautiful place of belonging around the Hebrew calendar.
I'm personally very inspired by what you're talking about, because you, like me, or like what I'm trying to do, are trying to do, deep Jewish work, whether it's spiritual or otherwise deep, but unauthorized, right? Meaning that you're not a rabbi, you're not in rabbinical school. And I'd like you to reflect on that a little bit, because, I've tried very hard to resist becoming a rabbi. I've never wanted, because for me, there's actually something that I'm going for here, which is the the need for regular people to step up and do these things and the capacity of regular people to step up and do these things, and that somehow it's been drilled into us that we have to defer to somebody else. And I almost feel like by not accepting a title like that, I'm trying to model the idea that a regular person can do this even at the highest level. And I wonder if there's a sports connection to that as well. Or you hinted at a little bit, but more importantly, I'm asking you about yourself and also about these folks that you're working with and how you think about the kind of unauthorized dimension of it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I love rabbis and I totally respect people who feel that call and step towards it. I don't feel called to be a rabbi, and so that's why I'm not. I feel really called to being a community member who steps up, just like you are saying, Dan. I've always really loved and respected the idea of the president of the synagogue as someone who takes on that volunteer role. And that's not a rabbi. I'm not interested in that profession, at least now for me. Maybe in my 60s, I'll go back and do rabbinical school and be like Rabbi Akiva and start really learning later in my life. But for now, I feel more like a business person, but one that's really trying to do it with a social mission and to inspire philanthropy to be able to fuel very equitable, important women's teaching and women's leadership.
So my last question is, can you now play that piece out? Because I'm really interested in how you're thinking about the future of At the Well on two dimensions. Both, where do you hope At the Well goes? Is it more circles or is it something beyond that, or all of the above? And can you describe that a little bit? And then the other question, I think, is, as you look at the landscape of the Jewish community today, are there ways in which you imagine, look, this isn't something that I want to do. This isn't something that At the Well wants to do. But these are some thoughts that you've had about how different elements of the Jewish community or different parts of Judaism could model themselves on At the Well and sort of say, hey, we could take on the holidays in a new way, or we could take on life cycle rituals in a new way, or whatever it might be. And can you, I think that your perspective is so important and so unique that it would just be interesting to hear a little bit of your just kind of random speculation about what else would be good to have out there in the Jewish world.
The goal is to have more circles, to have a network that's stronger between the circles, and to be measuring the impact of these circles on people's lives so that we can continue to progress society at this intersection of health and holiness. Because Rosh Chodesh is a ritual that is found within Judaism and resembles a gathering and a important marking of time that's found in other indigenous cultures, like we've said, and across the board, women's gatherings are still either used as a way to oppress them by men control or not remembered, then the biggest version of At the Well's dream is that we've created so much of a culture of a there in terms of inspiring Rosh Chodesh across the Jewish people that we can then create a bridge to other cultures and other groups and help them form women's circles again and inspire them to create their own content using the wisdom of their own ancestors. And then At the Well becomes a place that's created a there and the bridge to others. In terms of the Jewish world, my answer is pretty simple. I don't spend so much time thinking about what GCCs or synagogues should do. It's not my role. It's not my role right now. I don't know if I'll work in those spaces or not. But from my lens, there is not a corner of the Jewish people that shouldn't be having well circles or Rosh Chodesh circles. And so the model of At the Well is something very different. It's not a building. It's not a trip to Israel. It's similar to you. It's a podcast. So that's something different. At the Well can reinforce people who go on trips to Israel and come back to build those communities by inviting the ritual of Rosh Chodesh with the people identify as being women who are on that trip. With synagogues, you could have 100 well circles that meet in people's homes that reinforce people's connections to each other and therefore back to the synagogue. The same thing can be true with moms of kids in day schools. The same thing can be true with the JCC programs and the young professional programs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So my work right now are those things to help create the infrastructure of At the Well so that we can measure the work that we're doing and we can record it. So that's oral Torah and written Torah that's being marked by our website. And this well of resources is robust. and then to coach and inspire and work with the Jewish community to remember Rosh Chodesh, to bring it back, and to say that we can be partners. I'll just shout out The Well in Detroit, which is, founded by my friend Dan, and his wife Miriam was in my first Rosh Chodesh group ever. The Well and At the Well started at almost the exact same time. It was a very funny conversation when I called them saying I was going to do this and this was the name, and they said, we're doing something and this is the name. And immediately we were like, great, your model is circles, our model is circles. Let's get some women's circles. Let's get some well circles there. And as of now, they have 11 circles there. Those circles are reinforcing everything that they're building in Detroit, and is a model for what can happen in LA with New Roots that we've been working with, for years now. And almost every city now. Rashi is the one who said Rosh Chodesh is here because women are the keepers of the faith. So I'm looking around the Jewish world and I'm like, where's that ritual that Rashi said is going to really help us? And now is the moment to reinvest in it. Not even reinvest in it. Now is the time to invest in it, period. It is the first marking of time in Torah. And in terms of dollars and time and people's energy, Rosh Chodesh is not even on the same plane as Shabbat, Yom Kippur, the harvest festivals. And it needs to be up there.
Wow. On the circles front, I just want to name that Dan Horowitz has been on our show twice, and Dan shouted you out, and now you're shouting Dan back from The Well, which itself makes a circle. And the last thing on circles is I just learned recently that the reason there are 360 degrees in a circle, it could have been any number of degrees mathematically, is that ancient calendars were often 360 days. So the circle itself is a calendrical metaphor, which brings us to Rosh Chodesh, which brings us full circle again. Thank you, Sarah Waxman, so much for joining us. This has been an incredible conversation.
Thank you so much for having me and for creating the space to breathe life into this ritual, and to give me space to share a little bit of the story and my own place within the Jewish people that are alive here in 5781. And are saying yes to continuing to bring something beautiful into the world in honor of my ancestors and in honor of all the people who will come for me. I want to make sure that the people who are alive with me on earth right now are coming together and lifting each other up.
Absolutely. What a great closing note, that we should be lifting each other up. We certainly all need that in these unprecedented times of ours. Thanks again to Sarah Waxman for being on the show. Thanks to all of you out there for listening. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode, and we hope that you will continue wandering your way through the Judaism Unbound podcast in future episodes, listening in. And we want to close out this conversation in the same way that we always do, by encouraging you to be in touch with us. And there are a wide variety of ways for you to do that. First, you can head to our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. Second, you can hit us up on Twitter or on Instagram. Those are also Judaism Unbound as the handles. You can go to our website, judaismunbound.com. You can go to our email addresses. You can send us emails at our email addresses, dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. The last request we'd like to make is that we deeply appreciate any amount of financial donation that you can set aside and send our way. And you can do that via either a monthly recurring gift or a one-time donation at judaismunbound.com/donate. So thank you so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.